Well, the earliest critic of this proof was the monk Ganillo. And he said that the argument could prove not only a perfect being, such as God, but a perfect anything. I think a perfect island is what he came up with. And you use the same premise there. If a perfect island has all perfections, existence is perfect, therefore a perfect island exists type deal. For example, one could argue, a perfect island would have all perfections, and since existence is perfection, the perfect island must exist. Anselm, who kind of popularized the ontological argument here, replies in effect that a perfect island does not have all perfections. It is, after all, only an island unto itself, and therefore it has only those perfections proper to islands. The ontological argument will therefore work in only one case, the case of a perfect being who has all perfections in limitless measure.
Yeah. And so this first objection he doesn't think works because the idea of perfection only, God is an exception with regard to finite things. And so it only works with an infinite being, right? So, for instance, you can even think of it like this. So think about what the perfect island would look like. And then you ask yourself, ask several people. So think of the perfect island. What is the temperature of the perfect island during the day? Well, I do this in classes, and students tell me 80 and 75 and, whatever, 90, whatever, right? And I said, what about at night? Well, 60 and, 72 and that kind of stuff. And what we find is virtually nobody agrees, right, what the perfect island is, right? It's pretty difficult to come up with the perfect island. And so the point here is that finite things seem to be impossible with regard to perfection. But of course, God is different than finite things. That's the idea, I think, that he's trying to say here. Another objection says that, that what we're doing here is jumping from concept to reality, kind of like a quasi-Platonic type of idea, right? You have the concept and therefore it must exist somewhere out there in the world of forms. Yeah. Right, exactly. It says that since our concept of God includes his existence, he must exist in reality. But that does not follow. Plato, he says, to be sure, thought that our concepts are recollections, right? We're recalling. So recollections of the ultimate forms of things, and therefore that all our concepts, especially those of ultimates, have correlates in the world of form, right? So basically we were in the world of forms before we were born. We got stuck in this body, right? When we were born. And so, but we can recall the world of forms, right, in our previous existence, Plato argues. And therefore, that's how we're able to call all of these various different objects, that look different, that may be different colors. Some have 3 legs, some have 4 legs, but we can recognize that they're all chairs because they share the concept of chairness, right? And so we can capture that particular form and recollect it. Well, notice he says, despite Plato's rather mythological presentation of his view, he thinks that his actual rationale for the world of forms is something like this. Human thought presupposes a criteria, and that's what Plato thought, which cannot be simply derived from our sense experience. Yeah. So somehow it goes beyond our sense experience, our human thought, and it presupposes something that exists beyond our sense experience.
Yeah, or it has to be innate in us.
Share, right, is the idea here.
Right. So it has to be innate in us. We have to image it in some way, maybe. So, yeah. So Anselm says that our concept of the source of all perfection, the being who has all perfections, must be objective, not merely a figment of our own thinking. Even if Anselm is under the influence of Plato here, he says, Frame says he cannot deny the cogency of his basic reasoning. This argument, like all others, is reducible to his earlier argument of moral values. Hey, look at that. We get back to the moral argument as well.
Good. So another kind of objection he wants to raise with regard to this argument, right? This one was raised by Immanuel Kant. And Kant thought that Anselm was misunderstood the nature of existence by treating, notice, existence as a perfection of God. So making existence a character or a trait or, part of who God is. In Kant's view, existence is not a perfection, not even a property, right? For instance, Kant says that, existence doesn't add anything to our concept of something. So he thinks that Anselm here has erred by making existence one of God's attributes or properties, right? For instance, I wouldn't say that, this book is on the table and it exists. Well, no, by means of saying it's on the table, we're assuming that it's existence. Existence isn't kind of a property that we add in and of and, above the book being on the table. It's part of what we assume there. And so Kant thinks that Anselm was trying to do this with regard to his characterization of God, adding existence as a property. And Kant doesn't think that works.
However, Kant admits that his financial position is better with real dollars than with possible ones.
Okay. So monopoly money is not as good as real money that exists in the real world. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Well, and that's how we got the Federal Reserve System of today. And right. So it's better to have real money than fool money. So existence is therefore different from other properties and predicates in some ways, but not in the sense that it makes no difference to the objects that have it. Again, when you talked about the book, it's an implied thing. The book is on the table. It exists because it's on the table. It's a reference to it, and I know the difference between, for example, Secretariat and Black Beauty, two horses. Thus, it seems that Kant's objection to the ontological argument fails.
Yeah, notice Secretariat existed. Black Beauty didn't exist. It was an imaginary, kind of story about a horse. And so clearly we're using existence there as predicates, which Kant says we're not allowed to do. But we do that all the time, right? Especially when we're thinking about fictitious types of beings and creatures and that sort of thing, right? Horses exist. Unicorns don't exist. There, we've used it, right, in the way that Kant said we couldn't use it, but we do that all the time, right? All right, so now he wants to turn to the last difficulty with this argument, the term perfection itself. Remember, this argument turns on this notion of perfection. Mm-hmm. So, he says this is a fairly slippery term. Is existence a perfection, as the argument implies? And so he kind of gives a counterexample. Yeah. He says, well, it's not a perfection in Buddhism, for instance, right? Where nirvana is explained as a form of nothingness, right? And so, no, it's not in Buddhism. Nothingness is the perfection there, right?
Right. And since nothing is there, then there's no there to be there. Right. But in Christianity, perfection is a perfection where God saw all that he made and declared everything to be good. In other words, the ontological argument proves the biblical God only if it presupposes distinctively Christian values and a Christian view of existence. Substitute other values and you change the conclusion. This is why the ontological argument has been used to defend many different kinds of God.
Right. So notice in Christianity, God saw all that he had made, brought into existence.
But it doesn't say being. It's almost like he presupposes it.
Exactly. And therefore he declared everything that was good. So there, good value, but coming into being is good. It's a perfection.
Right.
Remarkably, he says the prayer in which Anselm formulates his argument, that is the ontological argument, identifies him as a sort of Christian presuppositionalist. Surprise, surprise, right?
What?
So now he's going to adopt Anselm's answer. He indicates that, as Anselm does, that he's not really in doubt as to God's existence, but he is seeking a simple way to prove the God whom, in his heart, he believes and loves. So, yes, I think in a way he can make this argument. Anselm is assuming that God exists, and now he's considering a way to show that. He seeks not to understand that I may believe, but to believe that I might understand. And so faith here is the basis for understanding rather than the product of it, he tells us. And so what's his conclusion then with regard to the ontological argument? Well, he says that his conclusion is that either the ontological argument is a Christian presuppositional argument. Surprise, surprise, right? Thus, it's reducible to his earlier moral arguments that we saw previously, or the ontological argument is worthless, right? It's not working. Right. So that's kind of where he leaves the ontological argument. And by the way, his discussion of all of these various theistic arguments. So we've kind of worked our way through a bunch of these theistic arguments and gotten Frame's take on all of these kinds of arguments.
Right. So if you're feeling bad about your prayers, just know that Anselm, with a single prayer, upended the entirety of Western thought and added value that we would scarcely even approach in our
prayer is
entire
a
lifetime.
Powerful thing. It's a powerful thing.
There you go.